How's it going, everybody? I want to first of all, wish everybody a happy Thanksgiving. I know it's Friday. I'm recording this on Friday, so it's technically Black Friday. Yesterday, I took the. Normally, I record these on Thursday, mid morning, afternoon, and then post them. But yesterday was Thanksgiving. I had an awesome Thanksgiving. We smoked a couple of turkeys on my Traeger pellet grill, and we had family over. We hosted Thanksgiving at our house, which we do pretty much every year. It just works out that way. Good stuff. Had a lot of family over, played some games, hung out with the family, all that good stuff. So hopefully you guys had a. For those of you that celebrate Thanksgiving, I hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving and stuff like that. So this is going to be episode, or I should say, ticket 23 for Tech Support Thursday. So being recorded on Friday, on Black Friday. So just got up a little bit ago, had a good night. We're going to go ahead and dive into it. We're going to start off some questions that were posted on TST22 and go from there. Actually, these are just comments. So thanks for the content. So this question comes from how to set up Cisco SD-WAN and EVE-NG. How do you obtain VTEP software pack? Does Cisco offer some kind of free limited functionality type of license so we can have them in the lab and study? Or so I don't think they let you download the software unless you've got a support account associated. So like a contract tied to your CCO account. So that's how I got it, because the company that I was working for at the time, we were deploying SD-WAN for a couple of clients. So they associated it to me so I'd be able to download the software and get everything working. So that's how I was able to get a hold of it. So you don't need, so the version of SD-WAN software that I was running at the time was 18.4, because that's the version that the CCA Enterprise lab exam would test you on, is 18.4. And as far as I know, that is the same version of code that the SD-WAN book was written on. I could be wrong on that, but I think that's the same version of code that the book was written against. So there's that piece. Sorry, I was interrupted by some family. They decided they wanted to come in and say hi. So, where was I at? So, based off the license. So, there's no license needed to run SD-WAN. So, the 18.4 code, I downloaded it and I was able to get it working inside of Eve and deploy it. And that worked. So, what ended up basically, the vEdges, the actual VTEP original software, so the vManage, the vBond, the vSmart, and the vEdges, they all work out of the gate, no problem. There's no license needed to run any of the features. Anything that you would do externally, for example, if you're going to connect to AWS or Azure or do anything like that, where you're going to be deploying either a controller or a vEdge in the cloud, that would more than likely need some sort of licensing or something like that. That's just my guess. I've never deployed it there, so I'm like, it's easier to say I'm guessing on that than to say for sure, because I honestly don't know. So, but to run just the VTEP software on its own, not the CSR1000V that can support SD-WAN. That one does require a software activation on Cisco's website, and for you to download the VTEP file and all that type of stuff in order for the activation to come through. But you can, if you follow the series that I put together, I walk you step by step through how that process works and how to register the devices manually inside of vManage to get them online, create all the templates to push them down to the devices and all that type of stuff. So there's that. Beyond that, I wouldn't know anything about the CSR1000V deployment because I've only watched some videos on it, read some documentation. I never actually did it. So I really couldn't give you specifics as to how that actually works. But no license is needed on 18.4 code. But if you're working on 19 or 20, and I don't know if there's anything newer than that, I don't know. I had problems running 20 code, and I had problems running 19 code with the methodology that I was using to get everything working. I stayed with 18.4 because that was the version of code that anybody that's studying for CCIE would end up having to use. So I used the same version of code and did a lot of testing on the stuff that you would have to more than likely get working in the lab. Or I covered most things. There's a few things that I didn't touch on, but there's documentation to help back that up. Ticket 22, I was wondering how you go about building your lab topologies. For example, do you have a pretty good idea of how you want to build it before you actually set up the EVE-NG lab? Do you use real-world examples, like from a previous project, or do you build them specifically for learning the specific technology such as SD-WAN? The truth of it is that I will probably build the labs that you see probably a dozen times, because as I'm going through, I will build an initial lab out of the gate, and then what I'll do is I'm going through, some information will come to light during the training, where I'll be like, okay, now we're going to test out this feature or this capability, or in this particular design use case, and I will have to make an adjustment to my topology in order to make that, whatever that thing is, work. So oftentimes when you see a topology that I've put out in a YouTube video, that's more than likely probably the 6th, if not more, time that I've built that lab. So you're getting the lab that I publish and put out on YouTube, and then if you're a member of the channel and download, or become a member of the channel and then download the files that I've uploaded to the member site, those topologies and whatever comes with it are basically the fruits of my labor. It's all of the testing and validation and stuff like that. You're getting the final product, right? You're not having to sit there and go through version 1, version 2, version 3. So oftentimes I'll put in the time and effort needed because I'm still learning how it'll work, and I feel like I'm pretty good at learning new things. So I will spend the time and effort to rip down a topology, rebuild it, get it up and running, and get it operational, and then run through all the things that need to be in place in order for me to fully test out that solution. And I'll do that multiple times because, number one, the more times I go through it, the more comfortable I get with it, and the more the better I get at it. It's basically what it comes down to. It's just repetition. So yes, I do spend quite a bit of time going through rebuilding labs, and I do that because the more times I build it, the more thorough I become. And that's really what it comes down to. I don't, it is very, unless I am already really well versed with a particular feature or technology vertical that I'm working with, whether it's SD-WAN or, for example, learning Cisco ACI or learning VXLAN in depth. Like I've taken VXLAN pretty much as far as you can take it to what's supported today. There's going to be some new features that come out, newer versions of code, but essentially that's what I've come with all of the stuff that I've done with the VXLAN. That's the type of stuff that I deal with. I will rebuild topologies and play with different variations of it. And yes, I do take real world projects that I've worked on, and I try to integrate them, and I'll come up with, a project will drop in my lap, and then I'll be tasked with getting it working. And I usually will bring that into a lab, and I'll build a lab to mimic as close as I can to the customer's environment so that I eliminate any variables. And if I need to make adjustments on the fly, they're usually small adjustments, whatever that might look like. So something that's usually going to be something I'm already familiar with, whether it's setting up a connection from that device that it's a new particular feature is getting enabled on. Say, for example, VXLAN is getting enabled on the box, but we need to set up a connection to this device. Okay, well, I'm going to be able to fall back on my route switch knowledge of how to get that connectivity in place. So I don't have to go like relearn OSPF in order to do that. So there's that piece. One second. Sorry about that. My dog wanted to go outside. So yeah, that's basically what I end up doing. So I'll rebuild a lab, I'll go through the technology and get it working so that, and so sometimes I get it in the first couple times, other times I need to go back through it a few times. Now, for example, I am currently studying, and this is because a couple of customer projects have come my way where I've had to go learn. Yes, I am currently actively learning, I know I'm kind of a redundant statement, ACI. And I've actually had a lot of fun learning it. And I've gone through quite a bit of training over the past couple weeks on it to get a better grasp of how it works. I understood it at a high level, like the 100,000 foot view, but now that I'm diving into the weeds and having to understand how it all works, between INE, between kbits.live, so core but, lab minutes, I've got O'Reilly Media, so I have a subscription to Safari O'Reilly. I happen to work with this gentleman right here, the author of the book. That guy right there, Amar Ahmadi. I'll give him a shout out. He wrote the book. As a matter of fact, back in June, when I started my new job, I had the ability to go work with him for a week down in Nashville to deploy ACI for a client. So I learned a lot about ACI working with him. And it's actually a signed copy of the book. I've got one of the few that he signed. And so it's kind of cool working with the guy that wrote the book. And there's also a video series that he put out on how ACI works. So there's multiple levels of content that I'm going through right now to learn ACI. So I'm becoming more and more familiar with how it operates. The drawback to learning ACI is, number one, is it's hardware dependent. Now I do happen to have, and normally I don't do this in a tech support Thursday, but I'm gonna make an exception because I'm trying to show you what I've got going on here. In just one second here while I bring this over. I am currently, go ahead and share my screen. I currently have the ACI simulator 5.2.1 deployed. Now this is a virtual machine running inside of ESXi that it's kind of a beast. It's 16 CPU, 64 gigs of RAM for a 2-spine, 2-leaf deployment. You have 2 spines, 2 leaf switches, and 1 APIC. I have only done the fabric discovery, so I'll go ahead and I'll take just a moment to show you what I'm talking about, just to show you where I'm at. It's actually kind of cool once you start playing with it. And the answer to, I know there's going to be the question of, well, are you going to do any training on ACI? I more than likely will. But the problem with doing any type of ACI training is that there's a lot to it. So if we go over here to Fabric, and I show you the topology, this is basically what I'm working with. Let me go to click on actually topology. So this is the topology that I've got built so far. It's nothing impressive because it's small. If I go over here to Fabric Membership, I have 2 leaves and 2 spines, and everything's working the way that it would expect to. I have not done anything beyond that. I haven't done anything with inside of the Fabric access policies to build any of the interface policies. I'm like right now, I am literally just learning how the ACI object workflow works and just going through the initial video series to understand how it all operates. I mean, I've taken a lot of notes on it, but right now I'm just watching videos, learning how ACI works as a whole system, and then as I start to understand it better, I will take it further and further and further. Now, I would love to be able to go out and buy a single spine switch, 2 leaf switches, and an APIC, or maybe convert one of my other ESXi hosts as a C220 and convert it to an APIC, and then join it to the Fabric, and then build out my own ACI lab. I would love to do that. I'm not saying that I won't be able to, but as it sits right now, I really don't have. It's expensive. I'm guessing it's going to be a couple $1,000s to go build an ACI lab, but I don't know how far I want to take it just to pass an exam, or to basically be able to get something working in a customer's environment. I don't know how far I need to take it because I haven't been far enough down that path. But going back to your original question, if I did have if this was something that I could run inside of Eve, I 100% would. And I would do it in a heartbeat, because then that would give me a lot of latitude to play with ACI and understand how it all works. One thing that I was tempting to do, and just not that I was trying to hide it or anything like that, but it's just a thought process that I had, was to get, and I think you can, I think it shows up inside of Eve. Let me go ahead and pull this up real quick. Where's the other? 105. Yeah, this one. Let me go ahead and log into this server real quick. And I want, this is .70. Okay, so let me go ahead and show you what I'm talking about here. So if you were to look here, this is one of the VXLAN fabrics that I'm currently working through for a client. I'll go ahead and get out of the way. It's a rather involved design. This is a combination of single fabric. Let me go ahead and flip this over to dark mode. Single fabric, multi-fabric, multi-pod, and then multi-site. It's a big deployment because the customer that I'm working with has a rather large investment. But if you look right here in Node, if you come down here, you see Cisco Application Policy Infrastructure. I am going to go on a limb and say that this means APIC, the Application Policy Infrastructure Controller, which is what APIC stands for, is Application Policy Infrastructure Controller. So I'm going to assume that you can get this working inside of Eve. And then one of the other thoughts that I had was to download, I actually already have it downloaded, was to download the ACI software for the 9300 series switch, and then go ahead and download it to the Nexus switch, and then run the command to convert it from Nexus mode to ACI mode and try it with that. That was something I was kicking around the idea to do. I somehow just never got to it, but that's kind of where I'm at with that. So, because then I'd be able to test it out. If it would work, great. If it doesn't, I'll find out soon. But that's just one of those things where I'm like, I wonder if that would work. Because, like I said, because of the fact that Cisco ACI is so difficult, because it's all hardware specific, right? It's hard to lab that up unless you have a dedicated lab to work with. But that's one of the things I'm like, well, that'd be cool to play with. But that's some of the other stuff that I'm operating with. And I do leverage previous project experience to build my labs. Sometimes the labs that I show you come directly from a customer deployment. Other times, or it's all sanitized and I just talk about what it is that we did. Or I come up with a scenario and then I walk you guys through it. Both solutions basically apply. But I typically like to go over the technology over and over and over again, because practice makes permanent, right? The more times you cover it, and I'm pretty detail oriented in my lab, my note taking, so that I know what to click, where to click. And right now, that's basically what I'm doing with ACI. I'm learning the theory, I'm learning the logic workflows, I'm learning the GUI clicks and where to do that. Because anybody that's ever learned how to work with inside of a GUI, you have to understand the click-through process. I find anything where you're configuring something via the CLI so much easier, because then you can just literally just type out the commands, and then the level of the command level, at the command level you're typing them in at, and you can, or what subconfig mode you're in. And it makes it so much easier. That's why the CCIE, especially like enterprise and enterprise infrastructure, service provider, they're typically, and a good portion of security is easy, because you're literally just understanding how the particular technology works, and then you just need to know what the CLI syntax is in order to implement features. So it makes it really easy to get working, and that stuff is virtualizable, right? So I can run it in Eve. Not everything can be run in Eve, unfortunately. So I was actually kicking around the idea of converting one of my Cisco servers over to an APIC, and then buying a spine and 2 leaf switches and testing out ACI that way, and seeing exactly how it would work. As I have routers that I can connect to it, I can create a VPC through it, I can create a port channel, all that type of stuff, and just learn it that way. And I'm, like I said, I'm thinking between 1,500 and 2,000 to get an ACI lab, and that to me it'd be worth it. because it'd be a legit deployment and stuff like that. But I'm going to take the ACI simulator that I've got, and I'm going to work through how it works. Go through all the clickety click stuff and understand how endpoint groups are made, and doing contracts and all that type of stuff, just so that I understand the workflow, because I am working with ACI in production as of today, or in the recent past. So I've got to be. That's another area that I want to become strong in. And then eventually take the ACI exam. That's my goal in the next couple of months. Probably after the first of the year is when I'm going to probably take it. If I can get it, I don't think I'll be able to get it done before the end of the year. But I'll definitely be trying for it sometime in 2022. Get that exam knocked out. And then I want to take data center core. So that'll take another few months after that, which will make the ACI section of the data center core exam easier to go through, because I'll have already gone through it. And then focus on getting through that so that I can knock out my NP and data center. And you never know. Maybe go after my data center IE. You never know. Cisco Data Center Nexus 9000V, VXLAN 12 VPC, and VXLAN with eBGP, L2BP, and eBPN. Cisco support eVPN ESI multi-homing. So what this person is referring to is the Ethernet Segment Identifier, or the ESI, which basically is the same thing as a VPC. VPC and an ESI are very similar. I'm not going to get really into the meat and potatoes of it, but essentially the VPC is the Cisco-specific way of doing it. ESI is the open standards version. But it is supported. So pardon the dog in the background. Feels like he needs to bark out the window. Alright, next question is new Dell RA10 server review. Thanks, Rob. Really informative, and what you said about Real World Labs is dead on. Please let us know how you fare with EVE-NG on the new server. Oh, yeah, sure. So, pretty good so far. I've got 3 instances of Eve running on it currently, and I'm sitting at... What am I sitting at? I'm sitting at about 40 gigahertz of CPU, which is about 40% of the host, and about 130 gigs of RAM, or basically about 50% RAM utilization on the host right now. Not a lot going on there. I did try running DNA Center in it. I tried downloading the controller. I did download the controller. It was a 30 gig file, by the way, ridiculously large. And I want to try to see if I can't get that to work and go through some DNA Center, because something I've always wanted to play with. So it's working out pretty well. No complaints yet. So yeah, I'll let you know how that fares. Cisco FTD Basics 1, configuring interfaces on FTD via FMC, the Firepower Threat Defense via the Firepower Management Controller. What is the CLI command to no-shut the Ethernet interfaces on FTD? Okay, there is no command to do that. The CLI commands on an FTD box are not there for configuration. They're simply there for verification. And as many times as I play with FTD, which is quite a bit, I've had to deploy it in the past, is when you're configuring FTD and you've got it in through a controller, you point it to an FMC, and you're not using the local management, which you can manage the devices locally if you wanted to. That is referred to as the local manager. You can do that, but you don't go in on an FTD box that is. This isn't an ASA running Firepower as a service, right? You're running, which is so there's a difference where a Firepower as a service is an IPS sensor software that you download to the ASA, and then you configure your global policy map with a what is that, I forget the class default. I had to think about that for a second. The class default class, you set a variable in there to point to your Firepower module. So any traffic that passes through the ASA will have to get kicked from the Lena engine up to the Firepower engine, and then go through all the firepower processes. And then once it goes through all the firepower processes, it gets kicked back to Lena, and then Lena being the forwarding engine of the ASA, and then it gets pushed out to the outside interface. So, or the egress interface, I should say. So, in that particular case, firepower is a service. So then, and only then, would you be able to shut no shut interfaces on an ASA via the CLI. On an FTD box, you don't do that. On an FTD box, if you want to disable an interface, you need to go to the FTD box itself through the management and the device management, and select the interface and disable it. There's an actual checkbox that you can go and disable the interface, and it effectively shuts it down. But then you got to go through these 7 steps of committing it and then pushing the config down to the FTD box so the interface can get shut down. So that's how you do that. It's not as straightforward. The Palo Alto is weird too in how they want to do it. It's like they don't want you to shut down their interfaces. But that's how you do that. On ticket 22, hi Rob, thanks for your videos. Question: work sent me an ICE course because we use it and planning to take the exam to renew my CCNP. My plan is to complete NP security by also taking the score, even though we don't touch any firewalls at work. Do you think this would be a good plan forward? Planning to use EVE-NG and do labs with ASA and firepower, firewall, etc. Many thanks for the advice. So, yes and no. My opinion on that, and it kind of goes back to what I was talking about with ACI. Well, actually, I take that back. It's one of those things where if you don't touch firewalls, that doesn't mean it wouldn't be a good experience, right? Because if you're dealing with ICE, ICE does a lot of different things. ICE, or ISE, the Identity Services Engine, does a lot of things. It allows you to do network access control. So, if you've got a switch port enabled for network access, you can control what device connects to that particular port and how they connect to that port. Can you do MAC authentication bypass? Do you do 802.1x through a machine learning and user authentication with a certificate or a username and password with MD5 and all that type of stuff? There's a lot of really cool stuff that you can do with ICE. I played around with ICE quite a bit, and it's actually a pretty cool feature. But I wouldn't say, even though you don't touch any firewalls, I don't touch firewalls at all either, but it's still something that if I wanted to, like, once I get my NP in data center, well, over the next, I'd say probably 4 or 5 months, then I'll have an NP in enterprise, an NP in service provider, an NP in data center. And then my next one would be more than likely to go get security. And because that would be the one thing that would make the most sense, because even though a lot of our customers are Palo, they've got Palo Altos deployed, Palo's a great firewall, I would still need to go through, and for customers that deal with firepower or have old ASAs and stuff like that, I'd still need to know how to work with them. So you're still going to need to know how to go onto the ASA, and if you're using TACACS for authentication, you're still going to need to configure the ASA to point to ICE for TACACS. If you're going to do any type of proxying, if you want to, like if you have users, whether it's FTD or it's ASA, regardless of what you're going to do, hitting your firewall, doing AnyConnect as remote access, you're going to want to pump that to ICE for authentication through like AD-backed group policy. So even though you don't touch ASAs, the knowledge you'll gain from knowing how to do all that type of stuff and pushing yourself through areas that you don't know, you're going to be that much better off, so that in the event that you do need to touch a firewall, you're going to be in good shape. So I've never looked at it as what is the scope of my work and what is it that I do and do not touch. I've never looked at it that way, because that's like if you play baseball. I played baseball all of my life. Since I was like 5 or 6 years old, I played baseball forever. If there's one game I know how to play the best, it's going to be baseball. And one of the things that I learned about baseball growing up, from the time I was 6 until the time I was, 13, 14 years old, was that you can be an all-around good player, which I was all considered an all-around good player. I could play the outfield, I could play the infield, I could play pitcher, I could play catcher. I was never great at pitching or catching. I could get the job done, um, but it's one of those things where if you don't, if you suck at, I don't know, hitting. Let's say you're not known for, you don't have a high on base percentage, or you don't have a high RBI. So on base percentage means how often out of every time you bat do you actually get a hit and actually get on first, second, or third base. An RBI is a run batted in. How often are you the batter and there is one of your teammates is on one of the bases, first, second, or third, and you hit the ball, you get a base hit, or maybe it's a pop fly, and then you got somebody on third, but the pop fly was deep enough in the outfield to where by the time that the fielder gets the ball, it's going to take longer for them to throw the ball into home plate than it would to the runner to get to home plate. So you have to kind of play that game of what's better. But if you suck at an area, right, and you're like, I don't really need to worry about that. I was one of those type of people that even though I was never great at one area, I was good in all areas. Like I could play the outfield, I could play shortstop was actually my favorite position. And there's a lot of action at shortstop. Besides catcher and pitcher, which you're throwing the ball all day long, and after a while your arm gets tired. But even though you don't touch firewalls, knowing how to work with them is a great capability. And I've never looked at my job as, or what I learn, how it's going to affect my job. Like, I don't need to learn firewalls because I never touched them. Okay, because I was that person early on in my career because I didn't know what I needed to know, so I started learning everything. There was a few times early on in my career, and this happens to everybody, where I was put in a position. One time it was my manager put me in the position. He's like, okay, you're going to handle this because this is, this is your job. You can troubleshoot it. If you can't figure it out, you can always escalate to somebody that might know. And then I've volunteered for times where it's like, I'll take that. I'll see if I can't figure it out. And so I've never looked at, I don't need to learn something because I'll never use it. Right? Like I don't need to learn firewalls, and I'm not saying this is your take on it. I'm just saying that you're looking for my input. So I've always looked at it as the more I know, even if it's only just the basics of a particular platform, that's at least somewhere to start from, right? Same thing with collaboration. I've got a phone sitting to my right here. I've got some phones sitting over here to my left. I was at some point interested in getting my NP collaboration and to get the phones working because I think making phones work and being able to call people, that's a cool feature. I've got video conferencing built in my house to where I can, my wife can be in the living room and she wants to talk to me, but I'm up here. She can hit the button, call me on my phone. We can have a conversation. So a lot of really cool stuff that you can do. Technology is awesome. So that's why I'm all about that. So yeah, you can. I would recommend learning the firewall. If you're planning on taking SCORE, you're going to need to know at least the basics of all the platforms. So know them as well as you can. And I wouldn't say learn them to the CCIE level necessarily, but be comfortable in all the major features. Firewall, VPN, remote access, because on the ASA you can do it all if you've got the right ASA code. Firepower, you need a license in order to do remote access VPN, but a lot of the other features work. So look at it that way. That's what I would say. Look at it as learning everything in the vertical you can, because the more you know, the better, the easier your job is going to be. That's how I've always looked at it. Thanks, Rob. I have a question. I saw some configuration where on ISR 4K they use port channel .VLAN ID. Could you please explain what's the difference between this and router on a stick method? They're the exact same thing. The only difference between the two is, the only physical difference between the two is if you have a single interface, a gigabit interface that's been no shut, or it's been enabled, it's been powered on, and then you create say it's gig 00, right? Gig 0/0, then you create gig 0/0.10 for VLAN 10. You get the encapsulation .1Q10, the IP address of 10.1.10.1/24. You go about your business. that's a single interface. A port channel is just going to be two physical interfaces bundled together, right? Remember interfaces, you're going to go to the port channel level, and then you're going to do that. The logic is the exact same. The only difference between the two is how many physical interfaces you're joining to the router on a stick feature. With a physical interface, you're joining one. With a port channel, you're joining two. Other than that, they're the exact same thing. I've done this quite a few times in production. It's something that I would definitely recommend if you have the ability of doing, to do it. How the DoD, Department of Defense, determines how IT systems are secured. I like to add GP update space /force space /wait :0 space /boot so that it doesn't wait to pull the updates and reboot if an update requires one. Never heard of the extra switches for the GP update space /result command. Trying that when I get back to work. A HTML page? ? Wow. So this is going back to a subscriber of the channel for quite some time. Also a military vet, and I was talking about security for something, I forget what specifically it was, and he commented on doing a STIG, which is stigging a system is the process at which the Department of Defense defines how systems that are owned and operated by the government are secured. So you can, I forget what STIG stands for. It's Secure Technology Implementation or something like that. It's an interesting capability, and there's an entire process for that. And people that do this for a living, they have a much harder job than I do. That's all I'll say to that. Security VPN IP2 DMVPN1, phase 1 with IPsec profile. Awesome video, Rob. You are welcome. Cisco Data Center Nexus 9000V, VXLAN 9, EBPN multi-site. I noticed that you didn't use Anycast VTEP in this video. I can't seem to get it to work with Anycast VTEP. I'm going to try just normal VPC with VXLAN and see if I can get it to replicate. Okay, so you're not going to be able to. So Anycast VTEP, and in case anybody doesn't know what this means, when it comes to VXLAN, if you have a VPC pair, you got two switches that are in a VPC peer, and you want them to also run VXLAN, you need to configure whatever interface is being called as the source underneath the VTEP. That, let's say it's loopback 0. The loopback 0 interface, you need to go underneath that and configure a secondary IP address. So let's say, for example, you got peer 1 is 10.0.0.0.1, peer 2 is 10.0.0.2/24, right? They're both /24s, or they're host IPs in a /24. You would need to go down to the loopback and create a secondary address on each device. So on peer 1 and peer 2, and let's say you were to give it .12 for peer 1 and peer 2. So 10.0.0.12/24, and then add in the secondaries command in order to be a secondary IP, and do the exact same thing for the other switch underneath the loopback. And by doing that, you will provide a secondary address that will appease it'll satisfy the VPC peer tied to a VXLAN VTEP, and then that'll get that working. I didn't use Anycast VTEP. I used to terminate my border gateways is what they're specifically referring to, and in this topology here, I will, because I would have a VXLAN VTEP capability available on the 9Ks on the border gateways. These are effectively going to be my border gateways up here. I've got two of them, and as you can see right here, they line up. Let me go ahead and adjust this one real quick too. That one, I hate it when the lines get crossed, but bottom line is that when you run this, then you'd be able to run a VPC peer with 7K8 and 7K, or 9K7 and 9K8. and be able to do that type of stuff, or do multi-homing with BGP or whatever you're going to do. So that's basically what they're referring to. So you won't, if you're going to do a VPC peer and use VXLAN, you have to use Anycast. And that the Anycast address is going to be the secondary IP address that sits on both devices. And if traffic comes in on peer 1 from a remote VTEP, then it should just go, it could be received inbound and then be forwarded down the member port down to the switch or the endpoint you're trying to connect to it. So you're going to need Anycast in order for, if you're especially using a VPC with VXLAN, you need Anycast in order for that to work. So let's see here, what's the next one? Ticket 22. Hello, Rob. Have a couple of questions regarding CCIE and server spec. One, based on your previous videos where you counted computing power of processors, technically an i9 12900K with 16 cores should at least be able to run one big lab in EVE-NG ? Or maybe there is a better option if we look at the core price expense scenario. No, he's doing a compare contrast scenario. 2, do that kind of PC I mentioned above will fulfill all CCA labs needs? SD-WAN automation. How do you practice at the DNA center? Is there a virtual appliance? Okay, so this is going to be a loaded response, but hopefully I can knock it down pretty quick. So the first part of your question is based on your videos where you counted compute power, technically an i9 12900K with 16 cores should be at least to run one big lab in EVE-NG. Pardon me, I was not expecting that. Yes, it should. So it should be able to run that without any problems, as long as you can turn on Intel VTX on it, because it's an i9. As long as you've got that turned on, which should be enabled in the BIOS out of the gate, it should be able to run it just fine. Sure. So what I meant by the core count is there are purpose-built CPUs out there for doing server-level workloads. The Xeon processor is one of them. I happen to have the latest and greatest proc that I have. What is this thing? Oh, it's an E7 48 and change, I think. Version 2. Actually, let me go ahead and just log into it real quick, since I'm right here. Pardon me real quick here, folks. Let me go ahead and log into it and see what it actually is, because I honestly don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah, it's an E7 4870, version 1 at 2.4 gigahertz, which gives me a total of 96 gigahertz of CPU. So that's what I mean by server workload. A server level workload is the CPU is purpose built for high compute scenarios. Eve would be a high compute scenario because you're running a lot of stuff inside of it. 2, what kind of PC does that kind of PC I mentioned above will fulfill all CCA lab needs? It should fulfill most of them. Unless you're running a ridiculously large lab, I don't see you running into any problems, to be honest with you. SD-WAN should work. Automation should work. DNA Center. There is a software appliance for it out. I just downloaded 2.2.3, 2.2.2, something like that. It's a 29 gig file. The thing's a freaking monster. There is a virtual appliance that you can download, and it will run inside of ESXi. I did go through and boot it, but I wasn't able to give it the full capability, and I think there was a problem with installing it. I don't know if I didn't do it right. I didn't really follow the install guide. I just kind of winged it. I just gave it 44 CPUs and 64 gigs of RAM. I mean, it's a beast, right? I mean, if you don't have 44 CPUs on your server, the Dell that I bought has 96, or 80 CPUs. So I gave it basically half the server. And it started to boot, and I booted it like 2 in the afternoon after I got the software downloaded and uploaded to the store to my storage appliance, so that it was local to the box. Once I did that, I powered it on and just let it start going through its process, gave it some initial IP address information, and let it go about its day. 12 hours later, at 2 in the morning, it was still going through its install process. 12 hours later. So I'm thinking a day install. Maybe. I don't really know. I don't know how, unless you have a beefy server and you've got the ability of downloading, or if you've got Cat 9K switches that can support DNA Center integration, I don't know how you're going to demo that. My goal is, once I get DNA Center up and running, to look at things like assurance and stuff like that, and actually look at the cool whiz bang wow stuff, is to deploy some newer versions of the CSR 1000V and see if I can't get them to join, like the 16.x version of code. Get them to deploy them, see if I can't get them to join DNA Center, and then use DNA Center to manage the router. That's my goal. I don't know if that's going to work or not. But you know what? You never know. Security, topology overview, and what's to come. Oh, so this is this video I recorded a long time ago. Thanks a lot for your content, and your channel deserves at least 10 million subscribers. Well, hey, I really appreciate that. Please, if you don't mind, try to record a wireless course because it's also an important topic. All the best. Yeah, the problem. So yeah, I've considered that. I've actually got. Is it up there? It is. Let me go ahead and just pull this off real quick. If you look right here. So this is my rack. It sits in my office. So if you look underneath a little bobblehead, you got the little device right there. That is a. I think that's my wireless controller. Actually, let me go check real quick because I honestly don't remember. Is this the Wilsey? Yes. This is a Cisco 2504 wireless controller. It's the same form factor as the Cisco ACI 5505 and the 5506X. So this is what you're going to want. There's the 2504 wireless Wilsey, and it has and it's important that you get, when I bought this off of eBay, I think I spent $150 or $200 on it. Make sure you get one that has a, what did I get, 5 AP license for it, in order for you to actually run the AP, the license on it. You do bring up a very good point. It's something I wanted to go do, but I don't do any wireless. So at some point in the future, that's another, when it goes on the CCNP Enterprise track, that's another switch that direction, and to go learn how this stuff works. To learn how the 2504, I know it's an older controller, but still, the point being is to do that. That's my goal. And I did buy a couple of access points that were compatible with it, but for some reason they weren't working. But since you do have interest in learning that, maybe I go through and play around with it. Maybe, I don't know. I'll have to see. The problem with wireless though is that it's physical. You can't replicate that in a lab, an EVNG lab, which is normally where I would go with this. The virtual Wilsey that you can download will only support Flex Connect mode, which means that there is no CapWAP tunnel that is built to handle traffic from the access point to the controller. So there's this CapWAP tunnel that's used to handle the data plane. So on an actual physical wireless controller, I call them a Wilsey because that's what wireless LAN controller. On a physical Wilsey, there's actually a logical tunnel that's built from the controller to the access point. So when traffic from is learned by the access point and received by the AP, you're converting Wi-Fi to physical media. It's actually tunneled back to the controller, and from the controller, it's sent northbound to the switch, to your distribution system. So the reason why that's done is so that it's the central point of connectivity. On the virtual Wilsey, you run in Flex Connect mode. Flex Connect mode means that there is no tunnel built between the access point and the AP, because the virtual WLC doesn't support that. And if you don't want your traffic, so for example, when would you not want to do a AP to controller tunnel? In the event that you've got an AP that's being managed by the WLC at a remote site that's got to travel over the WAN, you wouldn't want to have that traffic come over the WAN from the remote site to your WLC and then go back. That'd be a lot of tromboning and a lot of wasted bandwidth, especially if it's internet traffic locally at that site. You would use Flex Connect at the remote site and have that traffic come in on the AP and get switched onto the physical media and use the local network in order to get to where it's got to go. So that's where, just the basics of the wireless that I do know, that's where that would come into play. So maybe I get that up and running and join an access point to it and just see how it plays out. Because I do have the ability of doing that. There's actually, sorry, I'm moving this. This is what I'm looking at when I'm looking at the camera. I don't actually look directly at the camera. So if you look, well, sometimes I do. But if you look, it's right above it. So it looks like I'm looking at the camera or close to it, even though I'm looking at the camera now. I'm looking at Daffy right above it. So it's pretty close. But it gives me something to focus on when I'm talking, or the general area. But if we look right here, I have my, if you look, there's right in the middle there, you've got the router. Let me try to, so you've got the router right there. Above that is two 2950 switches. There's actually a laptop sitting in between the two 2950s, and then that's a 3550 PoE switch. And then on top of that, I've got a little 3560. I've got a, what is that? Oh, sorry, that's another 2504 controller that, or sorry, an 8-port switch that I bought. I forgot what that is. But then I've got 2 access points above it, and then at the very top is my other my other wireless controller. I should get it up and running, and then run a connection down to the 3550, and that would be my PoE switch in order to give power to my access points to start playing with wireless. So I could technically run wireless in the office and play with it. My goal was to do that, but you know how plans sometimes change. So anyway, there's that piece. SD-WAN 1, welcome to Next Gen Networking. Anyone recommend what resources used to pass their SD-WAN Cisco Cert exam? Books, videos, courses. I mean, I've had a lot of people watch my 33 videos, I think, on SD-WAN, and I never will say that my content solely has been the reason why they passed their exam, but it was a contributing factor. So I know some people know of the content. I know there are people that have never seen it, and they still pass and they do well. But I definitely say that the SD-WAN course that I put out is actually pretty good. So that's just my take on it. But then again, I think a lot of the content that I put out is pretty good. But then again, content, the quality may not be the greatest, but you know what? It's free. So take that for what it is. I do. Anyway, I know this one took a little bit longer than normal, but that's okay. I wanted to thank everybody for stopping by and hanging out. And until next time, you guys have an awesome holiday season. Be safe out there. Don't do anything that I wouldn't do. I usually play it safe. Enjoy family. Enjoy friends. Keep studying. And yeah, that's all I've got to say. I will see all of you guys next week.